Hi, everybody. George H.W. Bush. Look, my freaking clicker works today. I didn't do anything. It just works. What? All right. The presidency of George H.W. Bush, Papa Bush, Bush Sr., meant a continuation of Reagan-era domestic policies, Republicans, conservative, but a struggling economy and a broken promise not to raise taxes doomed Bush 41 to one term. He's a pretty handsome guy. He is one of the really most famous World War II heroes, truly a World War II hero. I think he was a fighter jet pilot or something like that, but he really was very competent and capable as a World War II pilot. The Reagan presidency ended amid scandal, the Iran-Contra affair, and the S&L bailout, which is savings and loan bailout, which was a fiasco. But Reagan's still the superstar of Republicans, still today. Famously, George H.W. Bush talked about 1,000 points of light, and he would always highlight people that were doing amazing things in America and called them points of light, and that they were all over our country. Reagan's vice president, George H.W. Bush, became the Republican candidate in 1988. Sadly, Gary Hart had to drop out after a scandal that he was actually framed. They made him look like he was having an affair, and he was not having an affair, but he dropped out as a result of that. And then Michael Dukakis became, that was it, this monkey business crew. Supposedly they tried to make it seem like he was having an affair with this woman. And right before this picture was taken, they said, hey, Governor Dukakis, Governor Hart, I don't know if he's governor. Mr. Hart, can we get a picture? And then right before that, she ran over and sat on his lap and got a picture with him. And it was it was messed up. He was framed to look like he was having an affair, and he did not. So we get Dukakis, and this is one of the most famous pictures of Dukakis looking like an idiot in this tank with this helmet on. He gets destroyed. Hey, dun 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 dun. Hey, where's the music? After Bush vomited on the Japanese prime minister, that's the leader of Japan, a new word entered the Japanese language, bushusuru. He literally threw up on the lap of the Japanese prime minister. Ouch. As we said, everything's on the table. These are the president's lips. Bush had few domestic successes, and he famously made a quote that would haunt him for his entire re-election campaign. In 1990, Bush supported Americans with disabilities by creating an act banning discrimination against them. Very good. Good. It's a very progressive thing to do. It was a good idea. Bush signed a major water project bill in 1992 and a civil rights bill in 1991. Also very progressive things to do. In this economy, everyone makes sacrifices, except for congressmen. They passed the 27th Amendment, which gave them congressional pay raises, can only take effect in the next congressional session, but it allowed them to give themselves pay raises. Isn't that special? And then Bush nominated Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court in July of 1991 because Thomas was accused of sexual harassment. He won appointment anyway, but there was a lot of controversy. And this is where we get the first time we get the word sexual harassment. Before that, it was just people like me and other women just being like, cut it out, like you're a creep, get away from me, get your hands off me, that kind of stuff. We were just fending for ourselves. So that happened to me absolutely in the early 80s when I first started teaching. I think I told you guys about that with an assistant principal who said unseemly remarks to me. But women forever before that, the 50s and 60s, it was standard practice, 70s, for men to say whatever they wanted to women, sexual innuendos, whatever they wanted. After Anita Hill and the Clarence Thomas nomination, sexual harassment became a thing in all workplaces that men and women should only speak to each other in professional ways and never say unseemly things to each other. No new taxes, read my lips. That's the famous quote that he said. Fortunately, they can really hold you to that if you don't have lips. He did have to raise taxes, and then it hurt his re-election campaign. Bush had made these campaign promises, read my lips, no new taxes. He literally said those words, but then he raised taxes. Bush supported tax increases in order to balance the federal budget, which honestly, that's a very great thing as far as Democrats are concerned. Of course, we should have a balanced budget, that we should be able to pay the debts that we incur. But it haunts him. Taxes increased plus a recession that plagued the last 2 years of his presidency, and it sank popularity numbers. Anytime the economy goes south, that's not good for a re-election campaign. So an approval rating versus a disapproval rating. Foreign affairs. George H.W. Bush is generally considered a strong foreign policy president, having witnessed the end of the Cold War, not gotten credit for it, but being there for it, and earned victory over Iraq and the Persian Gulf War in actually just a couple of months. Which is probably why his son takes us into Afghanistan and Iraq. I remember fully people thinking that the war in Afghanistan would just be a couple months, just like it was in the Persian Gulf, and now we are in Afghanistan. I don't even know how many years later. Is it 19 years later? Just this week, Trump is talking about drawing down troops to 2,500 in Iraq and 2,500 in Afghanistan. For me, I'm a dove, and so I prefer to have fewer troops in the Middle East, although they say it'll destabilize the region. They being especially conservative Republicans who are hawks and want strong foreign policy and strong military. Some people say it would be very dangerous for us to do that, and that terrorism would really get out of control if he really drops the troop level to 2,500 in Afghanistan and Iraq. The Republican senators are now pushing back on that. Like, don't you dare do that. Republicans are hawks. They wouldn't want that to happen. It does benefit Russia, though, so there's always that. That's not good news if we do something like that. That makes Russia even stronger in the region. Bush allowed the Soviet Union to collapse without American interference. He is not credited with ending the Cold War. After the Soviet Union collapsed, all of the statues of Lenin and Stalin were toppled, knocked over. It was funny because I saw lots of them there in 1990, and then within like 6 months or 8 months or something like that, they were all like being knocked over. I was like, wow, I just saw that. This should suit you better. He makes the military spending less. As the world's only superpower, Bush supported moderate cuts in defense spending because it was just huge. It is huge again now with 57%. I suppose when Biden is president that it will be less, but nobody really ever drops below 50% of the budget for the military. We will always have the biggest, strongest, greatest military on earth. Always, always. Again, our military spends the same as the next 11 countries below us combined. Is there any way you might help us rebuild without making us pay you back? Yes, if you move to Iraq. So we spent a lot of money to rebuild Iraq, and it helped Saddam Hussein, but the people here at home did not get support. We had supported Iraq, Saddam Hussein politically and militarily in their war against Iran in the 1980s. So the same Saddam Hussein that we were going to go to war against in 2003, March of 2003. They tied Saddam Hussein to the World Trade Center towers, and it just wasn't the case. It was Osama bin Laden, and they tried to equate Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein. They actually hated each other. It wasn't even the case. In August 1990, Saddam Hussein's Iraq invaded neighboring Kuwait, an oil-rich U.S. ally on the Persian Gulf. Here's Kuwait, and here's Iraq, and he went in and took over. It's not a thing. It's not a thing to take over another country. And so every country on earth joined the coalition to get them out. That is different than when we went in Afghanistan and Iraq. Every nation in the world, many of them went to Afghanistan, but not Iraq in 2003. And January 1991, Operation Desert Storm began with over 500,000 U.S. troops joining 270,000 troops from 28 other countries because everybody did support getting Saddam Hussein back out of Kuwait, its own country, and so he can't invade another country. When he left Kuwait, though, Kuwait has a lot of oil, and they set all of the oil wells on fire. They toppled the wells and then just lit them on fire. And getting that to actually be able to put out a fire of an oil well that is just oil coming out of the ground it was close to impossible. It took a very long time. A lot of people must have coughed like that during that time. This is probably most likely during the day. That is not even necessarily nighttime that we're looking at, but there was so much smoke and soot. As a result of that, a lot of soldiers came back and had medical issues because of all the smoke and soot during that Persian Gulf War, even then it was only a few months. There's Colin Powell, who was part of Operation Desert Storm, and Schwarzkopf. Colin Powell is going to become the Secretary of Defense for George W. Bush. The UN responded quickly with an economic embargo placed on Iraq, and military preparedness began. We put an embargo. We didn't let them get any money into their country. And then we were just massive. The US and United Nations NATO troops unleashed a hellish air war against Iraq for 37 straight days. Just bombed the crap out of the entire country. Sadly, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of civilians were, of course, killed as a result of that. Just pictures. And then in 1991, Iraq surrendered 4 days after the massive land invasion by UN troops. So as soon as we went in, after 37 days of this bombing, it was not a difficult thing to take over Iraq. However, governing it was not an easy thing, so we left. We did not try to remove Saddam Hussein from power. We just removed him from Kuwait in 1991. Way different than what's going to happen with George Bush Jr., George W. Bush. More pictures of that. And those are the oil wells that they set on fire. They just set them all on fire as they left. The U.S. was happy for a quick war, not another Vietnam. George H.W. Bush was seen as a great leader and a great military strategist. By God, we've kicked the Vietnam syndrome once and for all. And the Vietnam syndrome, of course, is this endless war with endless deaths of American soldiers. Bush allowed Hussein to remain in power, fearing a massive civil war in Iraq in his absence. George W. Bush, his son, George W. Bush, does go into Iraq in 2003, and he is correct. There was a massive civil war as a result. The reason is that there are Shiite and Sunni Muslims, and the majority of Iraq are Shiite, but Saddam Hussein is Sunni, and the minority Sunni population brutally controlled the majority Shiite population. So when we kicked out the Shiite Saddam Hussein and all of his people, then the Shiites took over, which is wonderful for Iran because Iran is Shiite. So weirdly, we gave basically Iraq a Shiite country to Iran a Shiite country, but Iran is our enemy. And still, we have very difficult relations with Iran. Donald Trump is making motions to maybe attack Iran before he leaves the White House. God help us, that doesn't happen. Bush enjoyed a brief, historically high favorability rating after the Persian Gulf War. Operation Desert Storm. Okay, time out. Bill Clinton takes over. Hey, no, stop. All right, I'll talk to you guys in a little bit. I'm going to keep going though.